Aloha and welcome to this practice WOD called Experience Testing degree Data. I have to admit, I got a little message on my screen that my mouse is running out of batteries. So don't let this happen to you when you come to WODs this semester. Make sure your mouse is fully charged. I might run out of batteries in the middle of the WOD. I don't know what I'm going to do if I can't use my mouse. I have to use my trackpad. Anyway, in Experience E30, we created some standards compliant degree data. And what we're going to do in this WOD is create tests just for one of those functions, the total degrees. The other ones are pretty much similar. And I don't want this to be, an hour-long WOD. So we're just going to test one of them. Okay. Before starting this WOD, make sure you finished E30. Otherwise, you're kind of hosed. You got to have that code available to you. So we got to start the timer. So I got to actually say finish, and then I'll say start. And we're going to start by creating a branch of the degree data repo called totalDegrees testing 1. So I'll go into GitHub, and here I am in the degree data. I'm on the master, and I'm going to say, what was the name of that again? totalDegrees testing 1. Okay, so back to GitHub. totalDegrees testing 1. We'll create this branch. That's where we're going to do our work, and then later on, at some point when we get all done, we'll merge that back into master, just like we did in the previous WOD. Okay, so we're going to create the standard JS-hint-rc file. So I'm going to do what I've been doing. You may have different ways to do it by now. Here we are in degree data. I'm going to save, and then I'm going to go to degree data, and I'm going to type return, and then select the whole shoot and match dot JS-hint-rc. Yes, yes. And then configure IntelliJ to use the file, fix any JS-hint thing. So we'll go, now we got to go to IntelliJ, and that's not the right guy. Here's the right guy. Okay, and what we'll do is we will say preferences, and not that one, but actually if we go to languages and tools, JavaScript, code quality, JS-hint, enable, default, okay. And then if we're going to run, what we're going to do is set up a custom scope called JS-hint that is just going to include data functions. Okay, and type OK, and it looks like our that we pass, which is not surprising since we actually, I think, got this to pass before we made it compliant. Okay, so let's go back, but that's good to test anyway. And now we're going to download the Jasmine 2.3.4 standalone distribution. We have this copy. We're going to copy the lib, spec, and spec runner HTML files into the project, delete spec helper, rename player spec to totalDegrees spec. Let's do that first. Okay, so over in, for me at least in my downloads, I got the I've got this, so I'm going to have the lib, I'm going to spec and spec runner, I'm going to say propeller C, and I'm going to go here to degree data, and I'm going to say propeller V, copy all that stuff in, and then in spec, I'm going to get rid of spec helper, and I'm going to rename player spec to totalDegrees spec. And then having done that, if I shift back over to IntelliJ, I'll now see those files, and but I'll have to go back because I have to say I want spec runner to load underscore data.js, data functions.js, and totalDegrees spec.js. Okay, so That's because if I go to the index, you can see I have these 3 scripts to load these 3 things. So I'll just do propeller C to copy those, and then I'll go back to, well, I haven't been there yet. I'll go into spec runner, and for including source files, instead of including those 2, I'll include my 3 files. Spec helper I don't need anymore, and then player spec is going to be totalDegrees spec instead. So that accomplishes this part. Okay. Now we need to design tests for the totalDegrees function. This is, that was just all the preliminary junk. This is where it gets interesting. And note, and now I want you to actually design some tests. Okay. So, or to at least some extent, we're going to do some boundary testing. So we're going to first check that totalDegrees returns the correct value for correctly specified sample data. But then we also want to check for 2 kinds of error conditions. When the awards field is missing, or when the awards field is present but contains a non-integer value. Okay, and so we're going to design our tests first. So that's all we're going to focus on now, is how would we actually write Jasmine tests for this kind of scenario. So let's start off with what we'd want Jasmine to do for a correct situation. So we go into our spec runner, and we just note that we have, we invoke totalDegrees, and in fact, if we look at our data functions.js, we have this test data that would be convenient to use. So what we'll do is we will actually make a copy of that, and then in totalDegrees spec, we're going to kind of do the stuff that we've been doing over and over again, which is we'll say totalDegrees, and then we get rid of this, and then should compute the total number of awards for correctly specified sample data. Okay, and so then we'd say, okay, if we call totalDegrees with test data, that should equal something. I don't know what that is. We'll put 0 there for right now. Okay, but we know it should actually compute the right value. Okay, and what we notice here is that we've got some JS hint errors, but we won't well, we could fix them if we wanted to. Globals data totalDegrees. Okay, and then we can get rid of all this other junk. This is the stuff that is just our template. Okay, oh, and is Hawaiian. It's also being imported from elsewhere. Okay, so we get rid of everything except one of them. Oh, underscore. All right. Okay, so let's go back to, so that would be a test for the first condition, which is returns the correct value for correctly specified sample data. But now we want to have it throw an error when a record is missing, one of the records in our sample data is missing the awards field. Okay, so how do we go about doing that? And the way I would recommend you think about it is, let's create a new sample data. We'll call this no awards field equals and we'll say test data, and then we'll concatenate to test data an object which has no awards field. Okay? And we're getting the error that says it's not been referenced, but we're gonna use it in a second. Okay? And so let's just copy this again, so I don't have to type quite so. So should throw an error when a record does not have the awards field. Okay. Here is where Jasmine is a little counterintuitive. So what you'd think, actually, if we go, let's go to Jasmine. Okay. Let's go to Jasmine, which, as you can see, I've gone to. And if you just go to the the intro page, okay, what you'll see is that there's this to throw error. Expect foo to throw error, and then it'll match the string that's thrown, or the type, or you can do a regular expression, or you can just check for the type of error that's thrown. Okay, this all looks kind of it looks to first appearances like we should be able to say this: expect total degrees if we pass it no awards field to throw error, something like no awards field. If we were actually throwing an error and that was the string, this should work. But it turns out this is not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is because what we need to be passing in to the expect is not the result of invoking a function, but a function, when invoked, should have the behavior that we're interested in. Okay, do you get that? So the way that this call is, when this line is encountered, JavaScript is going to actually invoke total degrees and return some value, which will be passed into expect. But expect now, with this to throw error thing, wants to invoke a function, wants that thing that was passed to actually be a function instead, which it can then invoke to catch the error. Okay? So there's a really simple solution to this in the case of this to throw error thing, and on the page I say go look at Stack Overflow, and what you do is you wrap this in a function call. Okay, and so what you do, it's very simple. You just say function, and then inside there you're going to invoke total degrees, no awards field, put a semicolon. Okay, now we've got this anonymous function, which inside, so now we're returning, when the JavaScript interpreter runs this line, the argument to expect is now the definition, a call that will return a function, and all that function does is invoke the test code that we want. Okay, so that's what this thing should actually has to look like in order to do the right thing, and it's a little counterintuitive. And it will kind of, I'm happy in a way that it's doing this, because it's forcing you to kind of think more about JavaScript and actually learn some of the cool things about JavaScript, which a function like a language like Java doesn't really support as well. Okay, so that was our second method. And then an awards field contains a non-integer value. That's the third test we want to test for. So let's go back to here. And let's actually just make a copy of these two pieces, because it's going to be kind of similar to that. We're going to say non-numeric awards. And so for this, what we'll do is we'll concatenate onto our test data something called awards, but the value of awards is not a number, which is what we want. It's actually going to be as a string. Okay, so that's bad. So now we're going to pass into that non-numeric awards, and we're going to throw an error that has a string value, something like non-numeric awards. Okay? We'll put a period on the end. Okay, so, so now we've written our 3 tests. Okay? And now that we've designed our tests, run them and observe that they fail. Okay, so go back and modify the implementation to make the test pass. So let's go over here to here, and then we got to go to spec runner, and then we do option F2, and we hit Chrome. Okay, and we notice that they all fail. Okay, so totalDegrees should compute the total number of awards for correctly specified sample data. We expected 403 equals 0. We passed 0. It was a different value. totalDegrees should throw an error when a record does not have the awards field, and we expected the function to throw an error, and it obviously didn't. And then totalDegrees should throw an error when a record does not have the awards field. I forgot to modify that string. Okay, so let's go back to here. It should throw an error when a record has a non-numeric awards field. Has a non-numeric awards field. Okay, so then let's go back to here, and then let's option F2. Okay, so now we have these 3 problems. Okay. So the question is, what is the correct value for our sample data? And the way I might think about doing that is console.log. We've got to figure out what test data actually has. Okay, and so this is one way to do it. I'm just going to invoke this guy, and then I'm going to bring up the developer tools in the console, and now I can see what my test data thing looks like. Okay, and it's an array of 3 elements. The first is award 69, 322, and the third one is 12. So 69 plus 12, 69, 70, that's 81. 81 plus 322, well, 322 plus 80 is 402. So 81 plus 322, so it's 403, right? 403 is the total number of awards in test data. So I'm manually checking that, okay? So what I want to do now is I want to go back to, now that I know that 403 is the number that I'm expecting, I can go to my spec, and I should say, no, it should equal 403. Okay? So if I now go to spec runner, option F2 Chrome, what we'll find is, yay, one of my tests now passes. Okay, so it does compute the total number of awards for correctly specified sample data. Okay, so that's awesome news. So now now things get more difficult, right? Now we've got to actually figure out how it is that our totalDegrees function should throw an error in the case where there is a record in the data set that does not have the awards field. And I think the thing you might want to do at this point, if you're me, is you might want to go back to underscore and take a look around at what we might want to use. And it turns out there's this very convenient function called every. Every takes a predicate and returns true if and only if all of the values in the list pass the predicate truth test. Okay? So how could we use that? Well, what I think we might want to do is we might want to say function has awards. Okay, and has awards takes a record, and it's going to return true if record has own property awards. Okay, so there's a predicate function. Let's do it. Let's add the JS doc. So returns true if the past record has an awards field. The record true if awards field is present. Okay, and we're getting a JS hint that we haven't actually used this yet, but that's going to go away in a couple seconds, so we're not going to worry. Okay, so now we've got this predicate. Okay, so what we could do is in our totalDegrees function, we could say if not underscore every data has awards. Okay, so what we're saying, we're going to check to see that every record in data has the awards property. Okay, and if that's not true, then we want to say throw new error, and then what was this? What was no awards field? So let's go back to here. No awards field. Okay, so now what happens in our totalDegree function, before we actually attempt to do this reduction, we're going to do a pass through our data set, and we're going to check to make sure that there is an awards field in every record. And if there isn't, if there is at least one that doesn't have it, we're going to throw an error. Okay, so on that pleasant note, let's go back to spec runner and let's try running this in Chrome. Whoops, that didn't work at all. Let's go back here. totalDegrees spec. totalDegrees spec. Okay, everything looks good here. Spec runner, option F2, no specs found. Spec, totalDegrees spec. Cannot resolve totalDegrees spec.js. Okay, so we've got a problem here. Spec. Why can't it? Oh, I see it, because there's that little TM that got put in there. Yeesh. Okay. All right, so Control Option F2, Chrome. Okay, and yippee. Now 2 of our tests pass, and our last one is still not passing because we haven't, written the error for it. So let's go back into. So this is for this one. The issue is we have an awards field, but the awards field contains something that's not numeric. Okay, so how do we want to deal with that? And so there's a lot of ways to do that. What I think the most convenient thing to do is here's where we're actually doing the addition in this add degrees method. So this would be a convenient place to figure out whether the awards field is not a number, and then throw an error in that event. So let's try doing that. And the way we could do that is we could say if is not a number, which is a JavaScript function, record awards. Okay, so if is not a number, so if our awards value is not a number, then we want to say throw new error. And again, I'll just take it out of this because I'm not sure, don't remember. Non-numeric awards. Okay. It would be nice if these were global variables and we could just refer to them in both places. We wouldn't be copying strings around. That would be a better way to do it. If we were trying to be absolutely perfect. Unclosed literal string. Okay, so let's add that. All right, so that looks like we're now testing to see whether or not the record, the awards field in whatever record we passed in is a number. And if it's not a number, then we throw a new error. Okay, so let's go back to Spec Runner, and let's go Option F2, run it in Chrome. Bingo! All our tests pass. Okay, so let's see. All right, so congratulations, you've just experienced a simple version of test-driven development. Okay, this is pretty cool. Test-driven development is a very modern form of software development. The idea is that as you're doing development, you always design your tests first, which all fail, and then you design code to make your tests pass. And once they all pass, you design some new tests, which are going to fail, and you kind of drive development that way. We're not really doing test-driven development kind of in the purest sense, but it gives you the flavor of it. Write the test first. They're going to fail because you haven't made your code work, fixed your code to deal with it, and then you go do that. All right, so let's go back to IntelliJ, and we're going to see that actually we're not getting any JS hint errors anywhere. We can run inspect code. Okay, and no suspicious code found. So we're right at 25 minutes. I'm going to call it 25 minutes. I think the next thing I have to do is just commit to GitHub. So we'll go over here and we'll say added tests for totalDegrees. And we'll commit and sync to totalDegrees testing. Okay? So there you have it for this particular WAD. Now in the last WAD, what I had you do is I had you merge that branch in and then add the README and all that kind of stuff. And that would be good stuff to do for this at some point. But I'm going to leave you here because what I want you to focus on is the testing aspect. And if this didn't work for you well, you can always just go back to, so let's say you DNF'd or whatever, whoops, you can go back to GitHub, okay, and then you can just basically click on master, all right, to say that you want locally to be in the master branch. So we've just switched to master branch, which means that we're now back to the beginning, okay. So one of the great things about using Git and GitHub in this class and for doing WADs is it makes it so easy when you create a branch when you start the WAD to back up to where you were before and start all over from scratch. Okay, and actually we're keeping our work around, right? So if we, if we wanted to go back and actually, kind of recover what we did, we just click on this and now we're back, right where we were before. It's awesome, isn't it? I think so. Okay, so without further ado, I think we're okay. 25 minutes, we're going to call this WAD. Hope you enjoyed it. Kind of interesting to have that anonymous function in there for throwing errors. I hope that helps you kind of expand your notion of how JavaScript works a little bit.